April 9th, 1991. The Gallia County Records Office was under 3 inches of water when archivist Emily Croft began her recovery inventory. A spring thaw had breached the southern wall of the building's basement, an aging foundation already rotting from decades of mildew, coal dust, and forgotten paper. Most of the files were routine: probate ledgers warped beyond use, grain receipts from the 1920s fused shut, civic marriage certificates ink-washed into anonymity. But tucked behind a rusted oil heater, under a collapsed filing drawer marked 1850 to 1853, Emily noticed something wedged into the corner wall cavity. A leather-bound folio, bloated from moisture but intact. No library stamp, no archive sticker. The spine bore only a hand-painted white number 27-E. The tag affixed to its twine read, "Patrimony Unresolved." Inside, a stack of 3 documents. The first was a faded land deed, drawn in quill. It bore the name Wesley Thorne, dated October 4th, 1849, and claimed 87 acres on what was then known as Hollow Ridge, just west of Pikes Hollow, Ohio. Coordinates matched what today is a dense stretch of unincorporated forest land near the border of Lawrence County, now government classified as Ridge 13, a term absent from any public map after 1972. The second item, a torn page from a family Bible, its corners scorched and the ink run at the folds. Still visible were 7 names, 1 for the father, 1 for the mother, and 6 children listed below, from Mary Ann, age 12, down to Samuel, age 2, all marked with a line, and beside each name, the same date written in a single, steady hand, November 19th, 1850. The third, a folded legal affidavit from the Gallia County Sheriff's Office, stamped April 3rd, 1851, and signed by Deputy Conrad Bell. It described a site visit to the Thorne property, following a report of silence and livestock wandering loose. The excerpt, copied for public record but never distributed, reads, "No signs of illness, no tracks, no struggle. But the mother's hands were black from soil, and her teeth were missing. All 6 children found arranged in the barn floor, each curled as if in sleep. A burnt circle of wheat at the center. Father not present." The affidavit was never filed with the state coroner. The ledger that followed, containing the estate's asset dissolution, lists the sale of the family's livestock on December 5th, weeks after the recorded deaths. No buyer name was included, only a cash amount. And the phrase, "finalized through church authority." No church was listed. The town of Pikes Hollow was surveyed by the federal census in 1850. It documented 47 individuals across 8 households. The Thornes were the only family with land ownership. By the next census in 1860, Pikes Hollow no longer appeared. It was folded into unincorporated territory. No surviving graves, no parish, no tax rolls, no postal route. Gone. You could call it disease. Cholera was rampant. Food was scarce. But cholera doesn't pull a mother's teeth from her mouth while the rest of the body remains untouched. And starvation doesn't organize children in a perfect circle, each child facing inward, their hands clutching dried wheat as if they'd been told to hold it. In rural Ohio, especially in the 1800s, the stories you told defined your legacy. But the Thornes left behind no stories, only missing records, inked out pages, and a ridge the county forgot to name. Emily Croft submitted the find for verification. The ledger was quietly relocated to Columbus for review. She wasn't told the outcome, but in a recorded voicemail to her supervisor, later released via FOIA, Emily said one line that chilled researchers for decades. If they went back to the earth, why did the ground stay clean? And who kept the livestock fed after the last child was buried? No bones were found. No markers, but the GPS coordinates from the land deed point to an area along the ridgeline where, according to a 1986 soil study, vegetative growth remains abnormal. Trees twist inward, Moss covers rock instead of earth, and on satellite imaging, the land appears slightly scorched, though there's no fire history. No controlled burns, just a subtle blackness that never fades. In 1971, a hunting party from Chillicothe reported stumbling onto an old root cellar that smelled wrong. They never gave coordinates, only said it was north of where the trail stops, where you can't hear the river anymore. One man was hospitalized the next day for seizures. His discharge notes mention acute delusions centered around an invisible woman feeding something beneath the soil. Those notes were redacted until 1994. By then, the hospital had shut down. And still, no official document lists what happened to the Thorne family. No court case, no death notices. Just the file, misplaced for over a century, now quietly reclassified in state archives as Unverified Pioneer Tragedy, number 27-E. It is not indexed. It cannot be searched for. It must be requested by name, which is odd, because the name never appears in any public directory after 1850, and yet it does appear. In 1912, a Gallipolis psychiatric report describes a young woman found wandering Route 141, barefoot, whispering names not found on any census. One of those names? Wesley Thorne. In 1953, a building permit filed in Jackson County listed a devotional structure intended for ancestral restitution. The applicant? A man named W. Thorne, but no signature, no address. And when zoning officials visited the plot, it was empty, just scorched soil and a doll's arm protruding from the ground. In 2004, a woman in Lawrence County filed a noise complaint. She claimed the neighbors on the ridge were chanting. Problem was, there were no neighbors. The ridge hadn't had a residence in 50 years. Her final report noted that she woke to find wheat arranged in a circle on her porch and her teeth aching. The dental x-ray was archived. 2 molars had cracked, not from decay, but from pressure outward. No cause was found. And then there's the recording. In 2020, a local high schooler uploaded a TikTok showing an abandoned cellar in the woods with a hole where the wind screams through. It was pulled after 12 hours, but not before viewers noted the image in the corner, a Bible page pinned to the wall, edges burned, showing 6 names. Names not known to the boy, but names matching the 1991 file. So the question remains, was this the madness of a settler family lost in grief? Was it the product of starvation, fever, and Ohio's brutal winter? Or was it something older, something buried, something that never left, because it was never meant to? When mothers dig with bare hands and the soil leaves no trace. When a father vanishes and the land keeps whispering his name. When history has no record, but every ridge hides a hunger, then we are not reading a tragedy. We are reading an invitation to return. So if your family ever claimed descent from the Thornes, if your attic holds a Bible with names inked out, if your grandmother warned you never to follow the path past Ridge 13, write it below, let it be known, and subscribe. Because silence only helps it return. And even this record might not be here tomorrow. Before there was a name, there was a trail. A muddy ribbon of broken wagon ruts leading west from the Ohio River Valley toward the ridges where the sun vanished too early. Settlers passed through it. Trappers avoided it. And by the time maps began sketching borders around the land, a clearing had appeared. A jagged bowl between 2 tree-choked hills with a single well and 3 cabins made from blackened timber. In 1845, the clearing was named Pike's Hollow. It never made it onto a railroad plan. The soil was too rocky. The terrain sloped in all the wrong ways. A church was started but never finished. The bell was ordered, but it never arrived. A schoolhouse was approved by the county but burned down during construction. The fire was never investigated. Locals blamed bad soil breath. That was the phrase, soil breath. By 1847, Pike's Hollow had 8 recorded families. 5 came from Maryland, 2 from Virginia, and one family, never identified by census, was simply marked unaffiliated migrants. Most had come to escape something: debts, fevers, accusations. What they found instead was a land that refused to grow anything but silence. Farmers wrote letters describing wheat that refused to rise, cattle that birthed twins with no eyes, and springs that ran clear until the day of the child's crying. No clarification, no record of what child. But that phrase appears more than once, etched in the border of a journal found in 1918, now housed in the Ohio Folklore Preservation Society. The day of the child's crying. Summer, the ground dried and cracked like peeled paint. In winter, the snow melted in odd rings around the old well. The birds didn't come near. And in 1849, when the Thorne family arrived, the hollow was already half abandoned. The Smithsons had left in the night. The Cray family's last child was buried after a bout of sleep paralysis that never broke. Their graves were unmarked. Their names were passed on by whisper alone. The Thornes settled on the ridge, a slightly higher outcrop with less rot and more wind. The location gave the illusion of safety, but the records, what little survived, tell a different story. According to a lost page of the 1850 census draft, unearthed in 1975 inside a private collector's box of Civil War artifacts, Pikes Hollow is listed with 4 active households, but the total population count is scratched out. The estimated number was 41, but only 17 names appear. Among them, Wesley Thorne, landowner. His occupation, carpenter, occasional preacher. The page's corner bears a small, circular stain. Not wine, not ink. Iron-rich soil, tested decades later by forensic researchers. Not unusual, but odd when you consider the hollow site's far above the natural iron line. And then there's the church. Built halfway into the hillside, its foundation collapsed in 1852 after weeks of freezing rain. The bell tower, never used, was found crumpled beside it. Inside, an altar stone had been etched with initials no local family claimed. Just 3 letters, V.E.D. When questioned about the church in later oral histories, neighboring towns said the people of Pikes Hollow worshipped with their backs turned. That's the phrase, with their backs turned. Some took it as metaphor, suggesting heresy or nonconformity. Others took it literally. In 1923, a field researcher from the Appalachian Superstition Survey recorded a local tale passed down by logging crews working the forest outside Ridge 13. The tale described a group of settlers who made promises in darkness and who taught their children to kneel facing the walls, singing with stones in their mouths so that the earth might hear better than the sky. Was it a myth, a memory, or something in between? Pikes Hollow exists now only in fragmented municipal references. A buried well cap registered in 1908. A deed dispute in 1936 involving a ghost parcel. A soil anomaly map from 1959 shows a blank zone. An absence, not a presence. The map notes the area simply as survey refused. A logging company attempted to buy the land in 1968. The deal fell through when workers began reporting tools vanishing and echoes from beneath. In a transcript now housed at the Ohio State Archive, one supervisor reported, "It's like the ground's been dug already, and it doesn't want to be opened again." No further purchase attempts have been recorded. Satellite imagery today shows the remnants of an access road, half buried, under forest canopy. At its end, a clearing where nothing grows except moss. No foundations, no chimneys. But if you adjust the contrast, you can still see the ring. A faint circle in the dirt where the center never grows back. An aerial photo from 2003 shows an odd alignment. 7 depressions in the ridge soil, evenly spaced, aligned east to west. Not deep enough to be graves, not long enough for furrows, but too symmetrical to be natural. Local myth calls them the waiting cradles. Why cradles? Because no children from Pikes Hollow were ever registered for school. Not one. The county school log from 1850 lists the town as approved but unpopulated. Despite that, church logs refer to at least a dozen baptisms, all handwritten, all struck through in later ink. One in particular stands out: Samuel Thorne, October 1850. Refused baptism after visible sign on tongue. Mother wept until blood formed at her lip. Said he'd already been blessed, by the earth, not the word. Who officiated? The priest's name is missing, but the note is signed J.D.M., Provisional Curate. No known clergy with those initials served in Ohio during that decade. The handwriting matches a secondary log found in 1910 beneath a different church in Lawrence County, signed by a J.D.M. who wrote of children not born of pain, but of repetition. What happened to Pikes Hollow? The official narrative is weather, a failed settlement, poor resources. But the documents tell a different story: a slow exodus, a communal forgetting, and then a deliberate sealing of what came before. By 1870, it was gone. Not bought, not burned, just erased. Folded into state forest, given no memorial, given no warning. Some say the hollow never wanted to be named, because names come with expectation, with judgment, and with memory. But what if the land remembers differently? What if it doesn't care for your story, only for your repetition? And what if, somewhere beneath the moss, there's still a place where children kneel with stones in their mouths, where worship is whispered to the dirt, and where the silence of a town is not an absence, but a vow? History tends to favor those who leave behind photographs, letters, court records, anything that allows us to place a name beside a face, a life beside a year. But some families disappear not all at once, but in layers. First, the photos fade. Then, the ink on the birth ledgers blurs. Finally, even the memory of their names becomes suspect. A wrong spelling, a town no longer listed. A middle name scratched out so many times it becomes a scar across the page. Such is the case with the Thorne family, whose final record, at least on paper, appears in the 1850 federal census for Gallia County, Ohio, sheet 17, line 6. Their names are handwritten in a smooth, practiced hand, likely that of census taker Elijah Mencken, who signed the bottom corner in blue ink. But someone else returned to that page years later in pencil, and what they did was subtle, but deliberate. They circled the names of every Thorne family member, and beside the last entry, Samuel, age 2, they wrote the word rooted. The 1850 census lists the household as follows: Wesley Thorne, 41, occupation carpenter, also noted as lay preacher in margin. Miriam Thorne, 38, occupation housekeeper Mary Ann. 12, Thomas, 10, Elias, 8, Joanna, 6, Abigail, 4, Samuel, 2, the family owned their home. Unlike many settlers at the time, they had 1 horse, 5 head of cattle, and were taxed for 3 acres of cultivated land. All 6 children were marked as literate or in education, which was uncommon for ridge families that deep in unincorporated Ohio. They lived atop the bluff just east of the unfinished Pikes Hollow Chapel. And then, they vanished. There is no record of the children attending school, no church registry confirming attendance, no death certificates. But we know this much: a page torn from the Thorne family Bible, recovered in the 1991 Patrimony Unresolved file, lists all 6 children with the same death date, November 19th, 1850. Yet the county's burial logs are blank for that day. So who wrote the death dates in the Bible? The handwriting is not Miriam's. A letter she sent in 1848, found later in a Maryland archives collection, reveals a softer, looping script. The Bible entries are sharp, rigid, like someone wrote them with a trembling hand, trying not to feel. Further evidence comes from a lesser-known municipal ledger, the 1851 livestock taxation rollback, stored in the attic of the Gallia County Tax Office. It shows a curious entry: estate sale Thorne, 3 oxen, 5 cattle, 2 plows. Buyer withheld, paid in coin, not bond. Date: December 4th, 1850. This suggests someone managed the family's estate 2 weeks after all 6 children were already dead, and with no documentation of a will, power of attorney, or surviving adult. And then there's the house. In a 1941 oral history interview conducted by local historian Jacob Fallow, an 88-year-old woman named Edna Mae Barkley, a former midwife from Colton, recounted the story her grandmother once told. They came from Maryland, or maybe it was east of that, brought books with no covers, said they were here to start over. She remembered the mother crying in the woods, said she was always barefoot, even in November, said the children didn't talk to no one, just whispered to each other when they thought no one could hear, called their father the Watcher. Not Papa, not Father, just Watcher. This matches the account from a Methodist traveling curate, known only by initials JDM, who submitted a baptismal rejection note in October 1850. He refused to baptize Samuel Thorne after inspecting the infant's tongue and claiming the mark had already been made and it was not of our making. He did not elaborate, but in the margin, he wrote the phrase, "Do not look the mother in the eyes if she starts to hum." Some have dismissed this as superstition, Appalachian religious paranoia. But in 1973, a stonecutter restoring a family cemetery on Ridge 13 uncovered a child's grave with a small tin disc embedded into the wooden marker. The engraving read simply, "Returned." No name, no date, just that one word. Pressed for further explanation, the restoration team checked their project logs. They had not marked the grave for repair. It wasn't on any list. In fact, the burial wasn't listed anywhere. The disc vanished before they could retrieve it. All this raises questions not just about the family's death, but their origin. Because while the census shows them arriving in Ohio from Maryland, the Thorne name does not appear in Maryland property ledgers, birth registries, or shipping manifests between 1830 and 1850. In fact, the first confirmed record of Wesley Thorne appears in 1849 with the purchase of the Ridge 13 parcel, drawn up by notary Andrew Callum. His notes describe the man as quiet, firm of voice, though slow to speak. Wore a wedding band carved from walnut. Children waited outside during the signing. One of them, the girl with no shoes, whispered into the hearth while we wrote. Would not look up. Who sells land to a man with no history? Who records 6 children's deaths in a family Bible but no burial? Who arranges for livestock to be sold when the estate had no surviving kin? Unless someone did survive. And here we enter territory that feels more myth than record, but the trail is still warm. In 1901, a vagrant was detained in Chillicothe after scrawling symbols into the stone outside a Presbyterian church. The man spoke in half-phrases, repeating names no one recognized. When brought into custody, he gave only one identifier. My father was the root. A search of the jail ledger shows his surname was entered as Thorne, though the handwriting differs from that of the clerk. In 1979, a psychiatric patient in Lawrence County was institutionalized after suffering seizures and screaming about the family in the soil. She refused food unless it was placed in offering posture and claimed her family had been taken for forgetting the rites of reversal. Her surname? Thorns, with an added S, likely an attempt at evasion or Americanization. But under hypnosis, she spelled her father's name, Wesley. She died in 1982. Her file was sealed. The bloodline was never officially traced, but through scattered documents, unfinished letters, and censored death notes, a pattern emerges. The Thorns didn't vanish. They fractured, they slipped into soil and shadow. And the name? It lingers. Because even now, if you trace the genealogy of southern Ohio, you'll find echoes. Families who don't speak of their great-greats. Children given middle names that match the Thorne lineage, but with deliberate spelling shifts. Thorne, Tharn, Tharnwell. As if trying to outpace something that walks slower than memory, but never stops. So ask yourself, What makes a religion legitimate? Is it the building with a bell? The verses with numbers beside them? The robes, the stained glass? The parishioners nodding in rhythmic agreement? Or is it something quieter, something older, passed through families not by choice, but by blood? The Thorns didn't bring a Bible bound in leather. They brought scraps, torn pages sewn into oilcloth, folded diagrams pressed between wood. And more than that, they brought something that spoke without needing words. In a letter sent to her cousin in Baltimore in early 1849, one of the only authenticated writings of Miriam Thorne, she wrote, "The air here moves backward. Wesley says the ridge has ears, and that we must speak rightwards so the wind may uncoil the blessing." The phrase "speak rightwards" appears again in a child's composition journal, found in a collapsed outbuilding near Ridge 13 in 1961. Inside were dozens of copied lines, each written in reverse cursive from right to left. One of the lines reads, "We bow not for mercy, but so our heads are below the roots." Who taught a child to write that? Let's go back. A missing church ledger from 1850, now partially reconstructed from ink transfer residue on its facing page, lists the Thorns as present but unreceptive. It further states, "Wesley declines communion, offers own rite, requests night hour, declines Latin." This was not a man rebelling out of arrogance. According to surviving Methodist travel logs, Wesley Thorne spoke in a tone humble to the point of dread. He didn't claim superiority. He claimed necessity. He claimed that what they followed was older than flood or law. A settler diary written by Jonathan McCrae, whose family briefly homesteaded on the southern edge of Pikes Hollow, recalls visiting the Thorne property in the fall of 1850. Children quiet, hands clasped wrong, not in prayer, but in covering mouths. Said they were waiting, not for supper, but for the low note. Miriam swept the floor in a spiral. They all watched the fire burn backwards. What does it mean for fire to burn backwards? McCrae doesn't elaborate. He left the next day. His family returned east. His final entry before leaving the region reads only, "Soil dreams in them." In 2003, a metal detectorist searching the region found tin charms buried in concentric circles. Each was stamped with a crude symbol, a child's eye above a downward-pointing root. Forensics revealed faint traces of salt and bone dust on the metal surface. The pattern, 7 circles, overlapping, matches the 7 marks of reversal, a heretical diagram found in the Lamb's Gospel of Earthly Return, a banned text rumored to have circulated through unorthodox Protestant sects in the 1830s. One of its most troubling doctrines includes the phrase, "Life must be repaid downward. Blood for soil, soil for silence." That same phrase was found carved into a beam in the Thorne Barn ruins in 1987. But it gets stranger. A copy of the Lamb's Gospel was stolen from a Maryland theological seminary in 1848, the same year the Thornes left that state. Though there is no official accusation tying Wesley to the theft, a seminary guard's journal lists a man who walked with 1 foot slower than the other, who looked over his shoulder even when facing you. The sketch shows a walnut ring on his finger. We know from a property notarization that Wesley wore such a ring. And now, we return to the children. In the journal of Eliza Ruckley, a midwife who serviced the region in 1850, she notes a disturbing pattern among the Thorne children. No sign of illness, but all thin. Eyes dry, not from sickness, but from fasting. Abigail cried during checkup, only when I reached for her hand. Miriam said she must not be touched unless the offering has been seen. Ruckley was so unsettled, she left the ridge. Her final note before departing the profession reads, "They are being taught hunger, but not for food." We later learn more through Matilda Cray, the only known child to survive after living in the Thorne household during that autumn. In asylum notes from 1852, she is described as mute except when drawing, obsessed with circles, figures buried with faces down, and mothers without mouths. She drew one figure repeatedly, a woman kneeling in a wheat circle, her teeth scattered around her in tiny piles, hands pressed against her own ears. Was this Miriam? Was this some figure the family worshipped? Or was it Matilda's only way of expressing a horror she never had words for? Even today, local children who play near Ridge 13 sometimes return home with their mouths filled with grass. They say they were just trying to listen like the others. No one ever sees who the others are. In 1997, a woman hiking the ridge recorded soft humming near the base of a moss-covered clearing. No insects, no birds, just the sound of wind bending wrong. When she returned later with a recorder, she found a ring of dried wheat, despite it being early spring. At its center lay a child's shoe, blackened by fire but unburned. The laces were tied together in the shape of a spiral. She uploaded the audio. The file corrupted overnight. Her account was suspended. The original username, Mary Thorne 6. She claimed it was her family's name. It wasn't listed in any local records. Until now. So what did the Thornes believe? They believed the soil was alive, but not in a poetic way. They believed it listened. They believed it remembered the name spoken over it and punished those who forgot. They believed blessings were not asked for, but bartered. And the price was always something warm. In the handwritten prayer book found in the cellar near the Thorne property in 1986, one final line was repeated in smudge dash across the inner cover. The blood we are given is not ours to keep. We speak it downward. We die it forward. Doctrine or delusion, faith or generational possession. Either way, the Thornes passed something on. Not salvation, not gospel, but a quiet, crawling shape of belief. One that didn't need altars or incense or Latin chants. It only needed one thing. Soil that had already been fed. It always begins with a silence that doesn't belong. Not the kind that comes from wind dying down or the hush of a forest before snow. No, this is a different kind of quiet. The kind that presses on the ears like cotton soaked in vinegar. The kind that feels aware. On November 26, 1850, Deputy Conrad Bell was dispatched from Gallia County to investigate a mail carrier's report of a dead stillness and loose livestock near the Upper Ridge settlements. The mail rider had passed through Pikes Hollow 7 days earlier, on the 19th, the same day later found in the Thornes Bible beside all 6 children's names. The report was vague, as all rural notices were back then. It simply read, "Oxen loose. House appears still. Smoke not seen. Odor not right." That last phrase, odor not right, became important later. But at the time, Bell assumed it was just an overdue harvest and a forgetful homesteader. By the time he reached the Thorne property, a week had passed. Bell's handwritten affidavit, discovered in 1991 and reclassified under case number 27E, is one of the few remaining official documents that speaks of what was found. It is unfiled, unstamped, and unsigned by any superior. Yet its ink bleeds with the certainty of a man who saw something he wasn't prepared to understand. His statement begins with procedural details: time, weather, terrain. Arrived on site 2:17 p.m. No animal sounds, no human call. Tools intact near shed. Livestock present, underfed but unafraid. Then his tone shifts. Front door ajar. No wind. Cold stove. Fire ash appears disturbed in spiral. Mother found in lower bedroom, seated against far wall, eyes open, hands blackened, teeth removed post-mortem or self-extracted, mouth sealed with soil. Let that sink in. Miriam Thorne, mother of 6, was found with her hands stained and crumbling from rot, her lips packed with earth, and her teeth entirely missing. No blood, no broken skin, just gone. In the barn, the horror deepened. Children located beneath eastern loft, 6 total, arranged in curve formation, heads touching, knees bent inward, appeared asleep, cold to touch, no decay. Each held dried wheat stalk in hands crossed over chest. Smell sweet, unnatural, similar to laudanum, but earthier. Bell's medical experience was minimal. but even he could tell that the scene wasn't consistent with starvation, disease, or exposure. The bodies were untouched by animals. No insect activity. The barn floor had been swept. Swept. At the center of the circle the children formed, a ring of burnt grain had been etched into the soil. Blackened wheat heads, deliberately spaced, not scattered, placed. On the central beam above them, the same sigil found on later thorn artifacts was burned into the wood. An eye rooted downward into a tree. Bell's next line reads, "Father not located. No signs of forced entry, no notes, no ledger." One prayer scrap found in kitchen with phrase, "The silence is full now. The soil has heard." The last sentence in Bell's report is scratched twice, as if the quill stuttered. "Do not permit this land to be resold." No further investigation was conducted. A coroner was never sent. No burial was recorded. And in January 1851, a simple tax notice was filed for the sale of livestock and tools, cash only. No record of who submitted the claim. Only a receipt marked, "Finalized, spiritual custody enforced." It wasn't until 1878, when a traveling preacher named Harold M. Guest attempted to start a revival movement near the old Pikes Hollow Chapel site, that the first whispers resurfaced. He described walking the ridge and feeling watched by something inside the root of the hill. His journals, archived at Ohio Northern University, include a sketch of a doorless cellar entrance he claimed breathed warm air in December. He never returned to that ridge. The townspeople, when asked, claimed they didn't even know a family had ever lived up there, but they lied. In 1911, a third-grade school register from Jackson County lists a child named Thomas Thorne, same name and birth year as the Thorne boy who should have died in 1850. The registrar's notes say the boy spoke only in questions and refused to be indoors at noon. His enrollment lasted 4 days before the family moved east suddenly. The family gave no forwarding address. And here's where the silence begins to stitch itself shut. From 1850 through 1900, no official document ever again references the Thorne family in Gallia County. Not a grave, not a marriage, not a probate. As if the land had been folded over them, sewn tight. And yet, their patterns continue. In 1958, a hunter near Ridge 13 reported a wooden ring of child-sized shoes. He thought it was a prank. He kicked the shoes aside. That night, he severed 2 fingers while cleaning his rifle, though he never touched the trigger. In 1982, hikers found a small dollhouse in the hollow beneath a cedar tree. Inside, 6 wooden figures facing inward. Each had wheat painted on their chests. No fingerprints on the pieces. No footprints leading in or out. In 1994, a woman in Chillicothe mailed a sealed envelope to the state archivist, claiming her grandmother once whispered about the family that fed the silence. The envelope included a brittle photograph showing 7 people standing in a wheat field, 6 children, 1 adult. The image was dated 1849. No names. But when scanned, a watermark appears faintly on the lower right corner. Watcher 3:7. There is no biblical verse by that reference. There is, however, a page in the Lamb's Gospel of Earthly Return, the forbidden scripture associated with the Thorns, which lists Watcher 3:7 as the passage where blood debt is made manifest in the harvest child, and all mouths shall still to receive what the soil remembers. The soil. The soil. Deputy Bell's affidavit, though never formally filed, was tucked into the 1991 box found by archivist Emily Croft. Its final page has a note in pencil, likely added much later. Children faced inward. No sign of fear, not sleep, but waiting. And still we ask, why no headlines? Why no outcry? Because the event didn't break the rules of their world. It confirmed them. The thorns weren't removed. They completed something, finished a pattern the land had been hungering to swallow. The sheriff never returned. The town folded in. Ridge 13 vanished from common maps, and still the land waits. She was the only one who walked away from that house alive. Not a child of the Thorne family, but a child nonetheless. Matilda Cray, age 11, sent to live with the Thornes for harvest season while her father worked the river barges near Pomeroy. It was common practice in those days, families helping families, one mouth fed in exchange for two hands working. But what Matilda saw during those few autumn weeks on Ridge 13 was never meant to be spoken, and in truth, it never was. Because after she came back, Matilda never said another word. She was found on December 3, 1850, wandering barefoot along the border of Gallia and Lawrence County. Her hair had been cut unevenly, her palms were blistered and raw, and her dress was torn, but not by thorns or branch. It had been cut deliberately, in long vertical strips, as though preparing it for use. When local women took her in, they found her unresponsive. No weeping, no panic. Only a low humming, almost tuneless, with her lips barely parted. She would eat only when food was placed on a flat wooden plate, and only if no one watched her chew. The doctor called in to examine her wrote in his notes, "No injury to the tongue, yet she shields it constantly. No fever, no swelling. Eyes track movement, but show no recognition of speech. Subject avoids mirrors. Scratches at wood when left alone." For 2 weeks she stayed with the pastor's family. Then, late one night, the pastor's youngest son awoke screaming. He said Matilda had been kneeling by the bed, holding something in her mouth. Something, he said, moved even when she stopped. She was taken the next morning to the Crawford Hill Sanatorium for the Feeble and Forsaken, a facility that no longer stands, burned down in 1908, along with all but 2 of its patient records. Miraculously, Matilda's was one of them. Her intake file is brief but harrowing. Name: Matilda Cray, age 11. Intake date: December 12, 1850. Condition: functional mutism, exposure to unknown trauma. Primary behavior: repetitive drawing. Refuses human touch, refuses bedding, requests floor only, no audible speech, repeats motion of brushing soil with hands. And most notably, claims no memory of family, but mouths the word "watcher" in sleep. From 1851 to 1856, Matilda remained at the sanatorium. She never spoke, but she drew constantly. Always in circles, always 7 figures, always one larger than the rest. A psychiatrist assigned to her care, Dr. Alphonse Gehring, attempted to interpret her sketches. He believed the figures represented the Thorne children, but Matilda never identified them. She refused to nod, refused to blink for yes. But she drew the same scene again and again. 6 children kneeling in a wheat ring, facing inward, their mouths sealed, and one woman standing beyond the circle, arms raised, head missing. In some versions, the woman was replaced by a root system, shaped like a spinal column. In 1854, Matilda was allowed to work in the sanatorium garden as part of her therapy. That spring, she buried 7 polished stones in a spiral near the edge of the property. She never explained the placement, but when asked by Dr. Gehring to identify their purpose through her sketches, she drew a small fire under the final stone and shaded it completely in black. No patient records from that era ever list her as violent, and yet her file bears one handwritten warning in red ink. "Do not allow near infants," has been observed placing wheat in bassinets. By 1857, Matilda's drawing ceased. Her health declined. She stopped eating entirely unless food was pressed into her palm and left there. One nurse wrote, "She watches the ceiling like it's waiting to lower itself. Sometimes hums in reverse. Sounds like a hymn, backwards." On June 12, 1858, she slipped into a fever and finally whispered 3 words, the first and last she ever spoke. "The soil sings." She died 2 days later. Her burial site was unmarked. The hospital burned decades later, and no relatives claimed her. but her drawings survived. In 1994, an antique dealer named Marcia Del Rey purchased a box of odd religious artifacts from a barn estate sale in Portsmouth, Ohio. Inside, she found a cloth-bound sketchbook marked in faint graphite, M. Cray, Watcher's Year. She sold it to a collector specializing in outsider art. It wasn't until 2010 that a local historian traced the initials to Matilda Cray and cross-referenced them to the hospital intake record. The drawings inside matched those described by Dr. Gehring, but now there were new elements, a second spiral inside the first. In one drawing, a child holds a broken circle in their hand. In another, a woman places something into her own mouth while kneeling in water. Perhaps the most chilling page is a full charcoal spread, black from edge to edge. Only one thing is visible: a set of teeth, suspended, arranged in a perfect ring. In 2016, a digital scan of the sketchbook was uploaded to an Appalachian folklore archive. Within days, 3 separate users claimed that their children had drawn the same ring of teeth without ever seeing the images. One user wrote, "My daughter asked if I knew where the singing dirt lady lived. She said the lady wore no eyes, but the teeth floated around her like a necklace. And then, she too went silent." The story of Matilda Cray doesn't end with death. It fractures, because there are whispers still, of mute girls who draw circles in dust, of children who hum backwards when they think they're alone, of a silence that replays itself in bloodlines like an unsent prayer. We often forget that history doesn't disappear when it's denied. It just finds other mouths. So if your grandmother spoke of a girl who watched without blinking, if your attic contains drawings with spirals you don't recall making, if your child refuses to speak after playing near Ridge 13, write it. Let the silence name itself. And subscribe, because the watcher may not need you to understand, only to repeat. By the time the snow melted in early 1851, there should have been records. A sheriff's death report, a probate hearing, a burial license, a town council meeting discussing what had occurred on Ridge 13. Instead, there was only the silence, and a few loose signatures, half erased, that tried to stitch the silence shut. The first act of suppression was quiet, barely visible. It came in the form of a single, uncirculated memo from the Gallia County Recorder's Office, dated February 14, 1851. The property previously held by one Wesley Thorne shall be sealed for spiritual arbitration. Ridge 13 is considered unsuitable for settlement until further geological review. That memo was never made public. It exists only as a carbon impression, found pressed faintly into the next page of the county's land registry, a page meant to be blank. The same day, the Pikes Hollow Chapel ledger, the one that recorded communion, baptism, and burial rites, was withdrawn from circulation. The church had no official clergy at that time, yet the logbook was signed and removed under the initials JDM. Those initials have now appeared 5 times in the Thorns' surrounding records, and not once tied to a living name. By spring, the town of Pikes Hollow was all but dissolved. The 1852 Postmaster's Route Registry notes that all parcels addressed to Ridge 13 or Hollow Bend shall be returned, as recipient area is no longer valid. That's bureaucratic language for something deeper. The ridge had been erased. Even census surveyors skipped it. A margin note in the 1860 enumeration ledger from Gallia County says, "No need to return to Hollow Ridge. Structure collapsed. No residents. Burned." There is no record of any structure fire. Yet by then, the original Thorne homestead had disappeared. The only map that still showed its location, an 1849 property survey drawn by notary Andrew Callum, was reported missing in 1873 during a courthouse renovation. His copy had been kept in a fireproof drawer. The drawer was intact, but the folder was gone. In its place, a bundle of wheat stalks bound in black thread lay diagonally across the shelf. Callum died the following spring, reportedly of sudden fever. His final written words, found in the margin of a marriage contract days before his death, simply read, "Do not open what is closed with the soil." So who orchestrated the cover-up? Start with the sheriff's office. Deputy Conrad Bell, the man who authored the unfiled affidavit about what he saw in the barn, resigned abruptly in May of 1851. His resignation letter is missing. Only the envelope remains, filed under disciplinary transfer, though no charges were ever brought. He relocated to Hamilton County and never served in law enforcement again. The man who replaced him, Sheriff Robert Ansley, is known for just one quote, written in a ledger margin beside an unapproved property reassignment: "Better to leave ghosts unburied than to name them in ink." Next, the local clergy. By the 1860s, the surviving families of Pikes Hollow, those who had left before the Thorn event, reported being denied communion in Lawrence County chapels. One family, the Crays, attempted to baptize their newborn in Ironton, but were turned away. The reason, according to the registrar, family carries silent doctrine, better to let it thin. Silent doctrine was an internal term used by certain Protestant branches to refer to unspoken heresy. Doctrines passed through posture, gesture, or behavior rather than spoken word. Whispers persisted that the Thorns had not died, but instead been ritually received into something unnamed, and that their descendants carried a kind of theological infection, a root line of spiritual deviation. A handful of churches in Ohio and Kentucky began conducting lineage audits, purging members who descended from known Hollow families. It didn't stop with churches. In 1875, a local journalist named Eleanor Fidge attempted to publish a serialized column titled "The Children Who Slept in Circles," based on rumored events from Ridge 13. Only one column was printed. In it, she described an unsubmitted affidavit about a barn arranged like a womb, and a mother with no teeth but too much hunger. She was dismissed from the Gallia Gazette before the second installment. The printer's notes for her column were found decades later in a locked drawer beneath a press machine. On the back of the last page was a sentence written in dark graphite: "They will not print what the soil hasn't yet forgiven." Fidge left Ohio the following year. Her trail ends in a census entry from Missouri in 1880, where her occupation is listed as silent caretaker. No further articles under her name were ever published. Then there's the 1951 fire at the Gallia County Hall of Records. It was small, contained to the east wing, but it consumed all documents between 1845 and 1855 related to Ridge 13. The fire report attributes the ignition to spontaneous combustion of hay fibers stored in proximity to exposed conduit. Yet no hay was stored there. What was stored in that room? Property deeds, court statements, probate rolls, and a wooden cabinet labeled "Unverified Spiritual Disputes." No blueprints of that room exist today. The county officially denies such a label ever existed. But someone tried to recompile what was lost. In 1991, archivist Emily Croft uncovered file number 27E- containing the land deed, the Bible page, and Deputy Bell's affidavit. The box had been misfiled under unincorporated business licenses. When she submitted the materials for digitization, the scan was rejected due to pattern interference. Every image came out blurred, warped by streaks of black and gold. Croft noted in her log, "Images failed to stabilize. Patterns resemble roots or veins." 3 weeks later, she was placed on administrative leave for procedural overreach. Her notes disappeared from the archive log. But one of her messages remains, sent via anonymous tip to a local historian. There were other files, at least 4, all boxed the same. I only opened one before I felt it watching me. So what are we left with? A town erased, a family removed, a ridge scrubbed from every map not carved in memory. But the suppression wasn't just clerical. It was cultural. Neighbors stopped speaking. Oral histories were abandoned. Children were warned not to speak the name Thorn aloud. And those who remembered were instructed to forget. One diary from 1906 tells the story of a child who sang backwards in the barn. The grandmother burned the sheet they slept on and buried their drawings in salt. The child lived, but never again spoke in full sentences. The final note in the diary reads, "It's not that we were forbidden, it's that remembering made it come back." And perhaps that's the truth. Perhaps the real suppression was not just from the officials, but from the land itself. Because when something is fed enough names, enough silence, enough ritual, it stops needing protection. It becomes its own archivist. Some houses rot, some collapse beneath rain and moss, their wood softened into soil, their memories soaked into the beams. But some houses don't rot, some don't fall, some stay standing when they shouldn't, not because they're well built, but because something else is holding them up. The original Thorne homestead, built in 1849 on Ridge 13, was assumed destroyed. Burned, perhaps. Swallowed by forest. Forgotten. That's what the county records imply. That's what generations were told. But the structure, or something like it, was seen again. In 1987, a hiking group from Marietta College conducted a backwoods ecology survey near the unlisted coordinates tied to file number 27E. They weren't searching for folklore. They were studying soil nitrogen patterns along unincorporated ridge trails. What they found wasn't logged in their final report. It came later, in a letter mailed anonymously to the Ohio Historical Survey. The envelope contained 5 Polaroid photos, each dated March 19, 1987, and labeled in shaky ink, R13 found. The photos show a timber structure partially embedded into the ridge wall. Moss covers the base. The front door is missing, no windows, and, hanging from the rafters, 7 child-sized dolls suspended by twine, heads dipped in black tar or oil. Each doll wears a strip of faded linen across its chest. On one, the letters MT are visible. Another reads, "Return," no faces, no eyes, only stillness, and the suggestion of a story no one was meant to see twice. The letter's author claimed they entered the house for 12 minutes, but upon returning to camp, 3 hours had passed. One of their watches had stopped. The other had ticked forward 187 minutes, but the hour hand was spinning in reverse. They attempted to return to the site the next morning. It was gone. In 1999, a boy named Evan Rusk went missing for 4 hours during a church camp outing near the same region. When found, he was muddy, barefoot, and carrying a small bundle of twigs wrapped in checkered cloth. When asked where he'd been, he said, "The house said not to knock, so I waited. She brought me tea. It was warm, but my tongue didn't want it." His mother later confirmed that the cloth matched a shirt she had burned after a miscarriage 8 years earlier. Evan never returned to the woods. He died by drowning in 2004. The lake he drowned in was artificial, built over what used to be a county trail, the same trail leading to Ridge 13. In 2006, paranormal researcher Jeremy Lyle, known for his Appalachian fieldwork, led a team to investigate the Silent Hill House, as locals whispered it. His team consisted of 3 members, GPS coordinates, 2 EMF sensors, and a digital camera with night vision. Only one video survived the night. It's 34 seconds long. Lyle enters a clearing. The camera tilts slightly as he gasps, "It's breathing. The wood. It breathes." The camera shakes violently. The final frame shows what appears to be a door with no hinges, slightly ajar, revealing a stairwell descending directly into the ridge face. No handle, no steps visible, just darkness. Lyle was found 6 days later, walking barefoot along State Route 325. He didn't know his name. He spoke in phrases that didn't connect. The silence hums. "Don't open with your eyes. Don't look with your name." He was diagnosed with dissociative fugue and institutionalized. He never spoke again. The footage was leaked by his assistant in 2011. It was uploaded, removed, re-uploaded, and scrubbed. But stills remain, and in each one, faint but discernible, is the house. The same crooked lean, The same door that seems to lean inward rather than outward. The same outline of a roof that should have collapsed long ago. But here's the worst part. The trees around the house are always the same height, no matter the decade. In 1987, in 1999, in 2006, the surrounding vegetation never grows, never dies, never changes. It's as if the land has been locked, not preserved. Paused. A 2015 drone attempt to resurvey the area by a folklore filmmaker ended with the drone crashing into a tree seconds after entering the ridge border. The footage ends mid-flight. No wind, no impact. Just the image of a roof beneath fog and what looks like a figure kneeling in the garden, arms outstretched. The filmmaker refused to return. She ended her documentary with the line, "Some homes aren't haunted, they're worshipped by something that never leaves the floorboards. And still, the house waits." Locals tell stories of hearing hammering in the woods near Ridge 13, despite no development. Nails clinking in glass jars, child footsteps pacing in the grass after midnight. And always, that smell. Not rot, not mildew, but something faintly metallic, like teeth washed in soil. In 2022, a woman passing through the area posted anonymously in a folklore group. She described a dream she had while camping off-grid. There was a house with no door and too many windows. I didn't go in, but my daughter was inside already. She wasn't afraid. She kept saying, "It's okay, Mama. I'm only visiting like the others did." When asked if she knew the house's location, the woman wrote, "I didn't walk there. The ground brought me." That post was deleted within the hour. So we ask again, what house remains standing when all memory says it should fall? What roof survives a century of storms? What wood never splinters, but instead absorbs? Some say the house was built on cursed land. Others say it was grown, not built, shaped from a tree no longer found in modern forests. A theory from a 2009 folklore journal speculates that the house is a memorial, but not to the Thorns. Instead, it marks the moment their faith was fulfilled. Not a tragedy, not a curse, but a promise kept, a soil-deep agreement. Because if you listen near the site, and we mean truly listen, with your breath held and your heart still, you'll hear it. Boards creaking like breath, floor shifting like a prayer repeated underfoot. And in the wind, something that is not quite a voice, but not quite absence either. Something that says, "You came late, but there is still room beneath." It was never just the Thorns. They were simply the name that cracked first, the one left on a water-stained Bible page in a box meant to be destroyed. But what we've come to realize is that the Thorns were not an anomaly. They were a spoke in a wheel, a visible symptom of something much wider, much deeper. Because once we look outside Pike's Hollow, once we trace the soil across county lines, we begin to see it. Other families, same symbols. The first known parallel appears in Meigs County, 1863. A family of 5, the Barrows, vanished during Pentecost weekend. Their cabin was found empty. No signs of violence. Livestock left to starve. At the hearth, a ring of polished stones arranged in 7 points, with a small, handwritten scrap pinned to the floor. It read, "Returned before the season soured." The watcher was kind. None of the Barrows were found. In 1881, 2 brothers surnamed Tulliver were removed from their home in Vinton County. Their teacher had filed repeated concerns, drawings of trees with eyes beneath the bark, hymns hummed in reverse, refusal to eat in public. A final report from the county inspector includes this line. Both boys stated they could only eat what had been offered. When asked to explain, the younger repeated, "She showed us how with the dolls." The home was later condemned. The floorboards were found lined with wheat husks, so carefully placed that botanists later confirmed they must have been combed into position. In 1911, a midwife recorded her experience assisting with a stillbirth in Jackson County. The child was buried at night, unusual for the time, and the family refused church rites. Weeks later, the mother was found in a fugue state, digging into the field where the baby had been placed. Her hands were bleeding. When restrained, she whispered, "The roots are tangled. He can't reach." She gave no name for the child. The family left town within the month. Neighbors claimed they came from that hollow ridge, where the wheat sings too low. In 1938, a school in Coal Grove expelled 3 siblings from the Gellis family after they were caught performing a sleeping circle ritual behind the building. Witnesses said the children arranged small stones into a spiral and then laid on the ground with their eyes closed for almost 40 minutes, breathing but unresponsive. A local sheriff attempted to question the parents, but found the house abandoned. All food had been salted. All mirrors were smashed. Taped to the fridge was a note. Their season ended. Ours begins now. The handwriting matched that of a Wesley Thorne land transfer file from 1849. Over time, these events stopped being logged. The stories were whispered, dismissed as bad dreams, rural superstition, trauma in disguise. But the symbols remained. In 1972, an elementary school in Lawrence County hosted a district-wide art project. Teachers were disturbed to find that 11 students from 4 different towns had drawn the same shape, a circle with 7 figures kneeling and 1 larger shape watching from outside. The drawings were destroyed, but one teacher, Marion Phelps, kept her copy. It had her son's name in the corner. He disappeared the following year. Her testimony, never published, was recorded by a private folklorist in 1989. In it, she weeps openly, repeating the phrase, "He said it was the same hymn, that it came from the ground, that it said his name better than I could." By 1991, the phrase "watcher" had surfaced in 5 different counties, all within a 60-mile radius of Ridge 13. Each instance involved children. In all but one case, the children either vanished, became mute, or drew the same symbols as Matilda Cray. This is not coincidence. This is a doctrine passed in silence, a ritual never taught aloud, but somehow remembered anyway. And perhaps most chilling are the surnames that repeat. Cray in Gallia and Pikes Hollow, Barrows in Meigs and Lawrence, Tulliver in Jackson and Vinton, Thorne scattered through every ridge like a seed that refuses to rot. These names appear in church ledgers but not in cemeteries, in census rolls but not in marriage records, in property disputes but never in obituaries. It's as if they were permitted to be born, but not to be buried. In 2008, a genealogy researcher working through Appalachian burial gaps noticed a pattern. Certain family lines, Cray, Tulliver, Barrows, Thorne, seemed to end abruptly, with no generational continuation, despite census data indicating multiple children. Worse still, many of the final entries were accompanied by the note, "Believed relocated." No formal record. But then came the field ledgers. In 2015, soil samples from a remote parcel near Ridge 13 revealed unnaturally high levels of human calcium, specifically in rings corresponding to ritual burn patterns, wheat circles, salt lines, ash spirals. In the center of one sample, a child's tooth. It matched a molar from a Barrows descendant still living in Kentucky. She'd never heard of Pikes Hollow, but her great-grandmother used to whisper before bed, "Don't eat until the wheat's been placed. Don't sleep unless the ground knows your name." And so we ask, what connects these families? Across time, across miles, across generations? It's not blood, it's not property, it's practice. Practice passed without words, children humming backward, drawings of circles never taught, burials made with silence and salt. And most of all, the memory of being watched by something that doesn't live above the earth, but beneath it. Something that remembers names better than ink. Something that feeds only when you offer it what you love. And this is where the story opens again. Because in 2021, a child in Franklin Furnace drew the spiral again. He'd never been taught it. He'd never seen it. But when asked what it was, he said, "It's the place where you kneel so your voice doesn't echo." He drew 7 figures, one larger, and a black line beneath them all. He signed the corner, JDM. That's not his name. That's the name in the Thorn baptismal rejection record, the name from the chapel that never had a priest, the name from the land deed ledger, the name that's never been matched to any living person but keeps appearing anyway. Some say it's the Watcher's name. Others say it's a reminder that the same voice speaks through every generation, just wearing different mouths. Some stories don't end. They recede. They go underground, not dead, but dormant. Like a root system coiled tight beneath winter soil, waiting for warmth, waiting for breath, waiting for a voice to call it back. And in the last 2 decades, it's clear. Something has started calling. It began in whispers, scattered, disconnected. A teacher's note, a dream posted to Reddit, a drawing mailed anonymously to a local paper. Alone, they felt like noise. But together, they formed a pattern. And the pattern said, "It's happening again." In 2014, an elementary school in Franklin Furnace, Ohio, flagged a child's sketch as disturbing. The child, age 7, had drawn 7 figures kneeling in a wheat ring with one larger shape above them. The teacher confiscated it. But when she asked the child what it was, the reply came calmly. "They're listening to the ground. The lady said it's their turn." The teacher filed a wellness report. No follow-up was recorded. A year later, that same child stopped speaking for 3 weeks after a family visit to Gallia County. During that silence, he filled 3 notebooks with the same repeated phrase, "The Watcher is hungry. The Watcher is waiting." In 2017, a sheriff's deputy in Lawrence County responded to a trespassing report on private land near an old ridge trail. The caller said her daughter saw a woman with no teeth standing in the garden. The deputy found nothing, but recorded a strange detail in his log. The porch was covered in corn husks and 7 wheat stalks tied with black thread. No footprints in snow, no animal tracks. That report was removed from public access in 2019. In 2019, a woman in Chillicothe posted in a parenting forum about her 4-year-old son's odd bedtime ritual. Every night, he knelt beside the bed, humming what she described as a song with no melody, and placing a coin beneath his pillow. When asked why he did it, he answered, "So the silence remembers me." The post was flagged and deleted. The woman's account has not posted since. In 2020, a Reddit thread titled, "Has anyone heard of the Watcher in the Wheat?" gained traction in fringe folklore communities. Dozens of users across rural Ohio and West Virginia chimed in, reporting dreams of a kneeling woman with black soil dripping from her mouth, children waking up with dirt beneath their fingernails, circles of grain appearing in their backyard without tracks, recurring phrases like, "The soil has ears," and "We speak it downward." The thread was locked after 48 hours. A backup archive was created until it too was removed. No moderator explained why. And then came the drawing. In 2021, a substitute teacher in Vinton County uploaded a photo of a chalkboard left behind in a middle school art class. On it, a spiral. Inside, the spiral, 7 tally marks. In the corner, the initials MT. Local researchers believe this matches Matilda Cray, the girl who walked away from the Thorn House and never spoke again. Of course, there's no way a modern student would know that name, unless someone was still teaching the ritual, not in words, but in repetition. Because that's how it works, doesn't it? The old rites don't spread through sermons. They spread through gestures, through silence, through things children do when they think no one's watching. Repetition is the altar. Imitation is the sacrifice. And the pattern keeps building. In 2022, a woman camping in a state forest near the Ridge 13 region reported hearing a child's voice in the middle of the night. Not crying, not calling for help, just speaking, repeating this. We will not open our mouths. We will be soil again. We are the wheat and the watchers. She reported no signs of children in the area. Her tent had been surrounded by a perfect ring of ash by morning. The Forestry Service declined to investigate, but the most chilling return came in 2023, when a high school student in Jackson County disappeared for 2 days. Upon being found, wandering barefoot near a ridge trail, he was holding a wooden disc, carved with the same sigil found in the Thorn Barn in 1850. An eye sinking into roots. The disc was made from timber not native to the region. No one could explain how he made it, or where he learned the symbol. He refuses to speak. He stares at walls. He hums at night. His last written statement before going silent. She told me my name was already in the ground. It's been waiting for me to grow into it. Experts call it trauma, religious mania, mass hysteria passed through folklore. But how does hysteria place wheat rings in snowfall? How does it engrave root sigils into wood never found in this state? How does it preserve phrases? The silence is full now. We diet forward. Across 170 years and dozens of counties, something has returned. And maybe it never left. Maybe it simply found enough mouths again. Because patterns don't need belief to continue. They need behavior. They need acts performed without knowing why. A circle drawn in the dirt, a hand cupped with soil, a bedtime lullaby hummed in reverse. And the more we find, the clearer the rhythm becomes. Every 17 to 22 years, reports spike. Children hum. Wheat is placed. The watcher is named. And always, a silence follows. Sometimes it lasts months. Sometimes decades. But it always ends the same way. A child kneels, the ground opens, and a voice says, "You remembered. You may return." Some names don't pass through history, they pass through people, written, erased, reappearing in new hands. Same strokes, same curve in the W, same absence of hesitation in the signature, as if whoever signs it never learned the name. They remembered it. And in this case, that name is Wesley Thorn. But the problem is, Wesley Thorn should have died in 1850. His 6 children, his wife, and every public trace of him ceased with the unspeakable event at Ridge 13. No burial, no probate, no obituary. Yet somehow, the name keeps returning. It first resurfaces in 1912, inside a psychiatric intake form in Gallia County. The patient, a man found wandering a riverbank, was nonverbal, hostile to mirrors, and prone to whispering hymns in reverse. When asked to sign the form, he picked up the pen and wrote, Wesley Thorn. The signature matched, stroke for stroke, the 1849 land deed filed under that same name. Not just the shape, the pressure, the curve, the placement of the T-cross on Thorn. Modern handwriting analysts, when shown both samples, called them functionally indistinguishable. But how does a name jump 62 years unchanged? That same signature appears again in 1953, this time on a mineral rights lease for a parcel of land just east of where Ridge 13 once stood. The application is sparse. No address, no contact information, just a single sentence. For the watcher, in inheritance, W. The county clerk flagged it as a prank, until she received a second document by post, unsigned, containing a drawing of the Ridge 13 spiral pattern, along with the phrase, "We do not die, we are re-entered." The parcel was never leased, but the file disappeared from the archives 2 years later. Then, in 2004, a permit is submitted in Vinton County for a devotional structure. The paperwork is minimal, but the signature at the bottom reads, Wesley Thorn. The handwriting is aged, slower but identical. The same slope to the E, the same open top on the S. Even the same ink pressure fluctuation, like the person signing it knew the signature by heart, but not by hand. The permit was approved. The site was visited by inspectors in June of that year. But the structure they found wasn't a church or a shed. It was a wooden ring of 7 posts, with a woven roof of wheat and twine. At the center was a child-sized stone slab, blackened and pitted with ash. The inspector took photos. None of them developed. The negatives were found warped, bubbled, and fused, as if the film had been submerged in breath. When the inspector was interviewed later, he claimed, "It looked older than anything around it, but newer than yesterday, like it built itself backward." And that's not the last time the name showed up. In 2017, a school counselor in Jackson County filed a behavioral concern regarding a 9-year-old girl who had begun writing letters during recess. Letters she never sent. They were addressed to, "Dear Mr. Wesley, I saw your house in my sleep again. The circle is ready. The wheat is clean now." The counselor kept one note. In the corner, drawn in pencil, was the watcher's root eye sigil. That child's family moved out of state 2 months later. She hasn't been seen since. And now we arrive at the final trace, a court file from 2022 involving a disputed will. The document contained a strange clause that a parcel of Ridge 13 land be returned to the name under which it was first fed. The claimant, a woman in her 70s with no known relatives. She signed the form, and beneath her name, in a second, unfamiliar hand, "Witnessed by W. Thorne." The judge asked who that was. She said she couldn't remember. She died 2 weeks later of a stroke. Her body was buried in a private plot, but her headstone was vandalized within the week, her name scratched off. Only one word remained beneath the stonework, carved in almost childlike letters, "Return." So what are we seeing? Some believe the name is being forged. Others believe it's a cult signature, a mantle passed down, like a roll in a secret order. But there's another theory, one that matches the pattern we've followed since 1850, that the name is not passed down. It's passed through. A possession, a tether, a root that speaks not with lungs, but with memory, relived. Because each time the name appears, something is different. Witnesses report fog thickening in doorways, animals refusing to approach the signer, electrical devices fail, breath shortens, and people forget why they came. In one instance, a notary swears she witnessed a man sign a document as W. Thorne, only to look up and find herself alone in the room. The chair was empty, the paper was signed, and the office smelled of damp wheat and warm milk. The document was later burned. The notary left the profession, but she kept the pen. She claims it still smells like soil. She keeps it wrapped in salt. So here's the question. If a name repeats, if it signs itself, if it never fades no matter how far the ink travels, is it still a name? Or is it a ritual? An invocation disguised as identity? A way of saying, "I'm here again. I remember. I've returned." And perhaps that's the most terrifying part. Not that the name Wesley Thorne still appears, but that we recognize it. That something inside us stirs when we hear it. That we feel the urge to whisper it, even when we've been told not to. Because names carry weight. They shape memory. They carve themselves into the soil and wait for new mouths. There's a point in every investigation where the evidence stops behaving, where documents won't scan, audio warps, and people forget what they were looking for. Not because they've grown bored, but because something deeper, older, is protecting itself. That point is here, because what comes next isn't a name, or a file, or a witness. It's an absence, a hollow that doesn't echo. And it began with a file that wasn't supposed to exist. In 2023, a Freedom of Information request, filed in reference to mineral rights around Ridge 13, returned an unexpected attachment, a GPS coordinate. No explanation, no header, no origin stamp, just one string of numbers. 38.73591 degrees north, 82.40233 degrees west. When plotted on satellite view, the location falls just outside Gallia County, unlabeled land government owned, marked only by a vague elevation dip and the designation, Survey incomplete. An investigative crew, operating under a local preservation grant, traveled there in April. What they found was nothing. No markers, no structures, just a stretch of earth that refused to map. Drones would not fly overhead. Compasses spun, and the soil, when dug, revealed no rocks, no worms, no scent. It was wrong, they said. Like standing inside a memory you never had. The team lasted 42 minutes. One returned vomiting black bile. Another refused to speak for a week. The third submitted her resignation with a note that read, "We weren't meant to know this. It's not a secret. It's a womb." Since then, the coordinate has been scrubbed from most mapping tools. You can still enter it manually, but the image will flicker. Trees will blur. Roads will loop. It's like the software doesn't want to see it. Like the data is resisting contact, but some things still slip through. A digital archaeologist managed to extract a topographical scan of the ridge, layers of soil compressed into elevation lines, and what emerged should not exist. A perfect circle, 79 feet wide, 7 depressions at cardinal points, and in the center, a downward spiral, hollowing into black. No structure, no stone, just an echo of shape in the earth, an echo that matches the Thorns' wheat ring, the Tulliver boys' chalk circle, Matilda Cray's final sketch. It is the same. And now, so many years later, the circle still breathes. We've followed the names, we've traced the rites, we've seen the symbols buried beneath memory, burned into barn beams, whispered in reverse lullabies. We've watched as the rituals passed from mouth to soil, from silence to sketch, from blood to breath. And we've come to the final revelation. We were never researching a family. We were trespassing on a root system of belief, a theology that does not want to be known, only enacted. What happened to the Thorns wasn't an accident. It was a fulfillment. They were received, their names reabsorbed, their silence echoed through others. That's why the records don't hold. That's why the land won't map. That's why the drawings repeat. Because this isn't a story. It's a recursion, a prayer that cannot be forgotten because it doesn't live in memory. It lives in instinct. Kneel, place the wheat, close your mouth, wait. Even now, some of you reading this will feel something stir. Not fear, not recognition, but something quieter, a pull, a gravity in your gut, a desire to retrace the circle. Because if we've learned anything, it's that the watcher doesn't punish. It waits, it listens, and it accepts what is offered freely. All these years, we've mistaken the silence for abandonment. But the silence was full. It was watching. It was remembering. And now, it's returning. The final entry in the Patrimony Unresolved folder, written in faint red ink on a torn index card, contains only one sentence. No date, no author. Just this. One day the last person will remember, and she will kneel willingly. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's why you're still watching. Maybe this story isn't ending. It's rehearsing. And maybe that's the real horror. Not that something happened, but that something is waiting to happen again. Through your hands, through your child's humming, through that quiet little habit you have of circling crumbs on the table before you eat. So if your family won't speak of a certain relative, if your dreams taste of ash and warm milk, if your daughter hums at night facing the wall, or if you've ever woken up and found dirt beneath your fingernails, write it. Let this record complete itself. And subscribe, because the watcher knows who still remembers, and this video may vanish like the others before it, before the soil decides it's full enough.